Delighted to hear that this is the last session before lunch. I'm sure everybody's dying to get some lunch. Unfortunately, Eileen Bowman from UCD had to withdraw earlier this week. So we just have two presenters at the moment, Dr. Sinead Keogh and Anne O'Mahony. So we've given them a little bit of extra time each to either present or to take questions at the end. So first of all, I'd like to present Dr. Sinead Keogh, who is Lecturer of Economics in the School of Business here at ATU Galway. She has been a researcher and lecturer at the University of Galway and here at ATU, and her research interests include the social exclusion of older people, particularly those on the margins of society, and the impact of digitalisation on their health and well-being. Having lectured and conducted research with and for people with disabilities, older people, travellers, the homeless and migrants, Sinead has a keen interest in inclusive and accessible education. Sinead's presentation gives an overview of the use of technology and UDL to enhance the learning experience.
Thanks very much, Niamh, and thanks for having me here today. Perfect. So as Niamh mentioned, I suppose I'm an economist by trade, but my research is kind of on the social exclusion of older people. And I've done a lot of research over the years on kind of people on the margins of society. So I've done some research with travellers, people with intellectual and physical disabilities, homeless people, etc., migrants, for example. So I've always had kind of an interest in inclusive education and more accessible education. So what I'm going to present today is some technology enhanced learning enhancements to some of my teaching modules and some UDL that I've kind of incorporated over the years as I'm working my way through the MA in teaching and learning. So I suppose I'll kind of go through maybe enhancements to Moodle, different continuous assessments that I've tried to incorporate into some of my modules, enhancements to learning materials and lectures and things like that. And I suppose this comes from some of the learnings over the years that I've had from teaching people with, I suppose more in the last couple of years, intellectual and physical disabilities. So in terms of kind of some of the technology enhanced learning and UDL additions to Moodle, so for example, just starting off with each of my Moodle pages generally have a headshot and a brief description of myself. I usually try to embed a table with the course overview, such as the top right hand side here. I've kind of moved over in Moodle to using tiles and kind of reorganizing my Moodle pages using tiles, because the students seem to really like them in that they can just click on a topic and see what's inside that topic. For example, I use the accessibility toolkit. I also include links to very relevant podcasts, particularly, I mean, we're living in really exciting times in terms of economics, so there's lots of really cool and interesting podcasts available for the students to listen to. I also include QR codes to dedicated Padlet pages that I have for each of my courses. I have attendance in there, and I also include a recording of the introductory lecture, because as we all know, housing crisis, issues with students getting to college, parking, transport, etc., so they don't always make it here, and sometimes they can just be starting later in the semester, etc. So I always try and record the introductory lecture and post it onto that Moodle page. So just it's a little bit more accessible for everybody. So in terms of usually in my first lecture or two, so for example, this is a Padlet page from my second years, for example. So second years, we all assume that they have done economics in first year. Sometimes they actually haven't. So sometimes they've just missed that economics module in first year. So what I do is I start off with the Padlet page. I ask them if they've studied economics before, whether they have or they haven't. Then I ask them about their knowledge of principles of economics, whether they remember it, whether they passed it, kind of what their grades are, whether they remember it in greater detail. And I use this information then to kind of inform how much detail I will go into or how much revision I will do in second year, so going forward. So just to talk a little bit about some of the continuous assessments that I've kind of started to introduce and implement. So this is one for a fourth year module on global and financial economics. So this is a 25% continuous assessment, and it's a group presentation. So the first thing I do is I introduce clear and concise rubric for each of them, and I have a recording over that rubric so they understand exactly what they need to, I suppose, the targets that they need to hit in terms of their assessment. So this group presentation is on lecture material. So I'm not asking them to go off and research anything outside of the box. I'm asking them to take one of the topics or a couple of subtopics that I'm teaching already and present that in a 10 or 15 minute slot to the group. So it's a smaller group, there may be 15 or 20 students, so it's kind of, it's possible to do this throughout the year. So each week one group presents. So in terms of kind of UDL enhancements, well, they have a choice of what topic they want to present, what subtopic, so they can choose something that's interesting to them. They choose the group that they're in. They can choose whether they want to present in person or whether they want to pre-record the presentation. And there's usually 3 or 4 in the groups. So in terms of TEL enhancements that I've added on this year, what I was finding was that in the first and second year that I ran this, some of the students were saying that some students weren't pulling their weight, etc., etc. So what I did this year was I set up a Teams channel for each of the groups, added in the rubrics to the Teams channel, and what I asked them to do was to, as each of them were adding information to their group, that they would just have their discussions, set up their meetings in Teams, etc., etc. So I was actually able to give them a grade. There was marks towards their group contribution. I was able to actually just see who was contributing. And the feedback, you know, even though I know students don't like presentations, the feedback this year was quite positive in that a lot of them said that they like it, forced them to take some material and really understand it so that they could present it to their peers and give examples, etc. It helped them kind of with their confidence in terms of presenting, and also it added the soft skill of they actually learned how to use Microsoft Teams, which is important going out into the workforce. So that's just kind of a couple of elements that's added into that continuous assessment. And here you'll see an example of, this is one of the Teams channel, the Teams page. The channels are down the left-hand side, and you can see where each individual student is kind of adding their element to it. So you can really gauge who's actually contributing to the presentation and to the group project. And here is it's part of the rubric. There's 30 marks for the Teams channel, so I added 30 marks to that, and you can see this kind of there's marks for the presentation skills, visual appeal, etc., etc. So they're learning Microsoft PowerPoint as well as learning their presentation skills. So one of the other kind of more novel, I think, continuous assessments that I've introduced is, have you heard of RTE brainstorm articles? So yeah, they're a style of article that academics generally contribute to RTE, and they're kind of, you're taking a concept that's kind of quite difficult, or I suppose, or quite complex, and you're breaking it down for a more general or public audience. So this is a weighting of 25% as well. So I ask the students to choose a brainstorm article related to economics, and write it in a brainstorm article style. So it's kind of different to academic writing, just to give them a bit of a different skill. Again, they get a nice rubric on it. I asked them to add in some pictures and some links. It's a different style of writing in that they're able to embed their personality and kind of quirkiness into it. It gives them just something different to write about. So again, in terms of generative AI, I encourage them to use generative AI, okay, to help with the writing, to help with the structure, but not to do the writing for them, okay? So I do introduce it, and we talk about the pitfalls, etc., etc. There's also recordings of brainstorm articles, and other technology enhancements that I've added this year is that within the first 4 weeks of the module, I asked them to choose their topic, post it up on Padlet, and then each person has to comment on has to give 2 comments on other topics. So it kind of gets them a sense of, they get to read what the other students are doing, etc., etc. So just to give you a sense of the kind of articles, they can be quite quirky. So for example, Taylor Swift's impact on global and local economy. Another student has done one on how listening to Christy Moore at work can make your boss more money. Actually, one of the students this year did one on kebab prices and how it's an accurate indicator of the German economy. So it's just kind of a different, quirky take on economics. Just gives them a different sense, just to do something different. In terms of lecture material, again, I'm very cognizant of students from various different backgrounds and with various different abilities. Okay, so what I try to do is, again, embed short videos, use colored alternative sentences, list the learning outcomes at the start. I also, for each module, I suppose, this will give you a sense of, so for each topic of my module, I try and give the students that's it. I try and give the students various different ways of learning the material. Okay, so I will give them slides, okay, which I'll go through in class, obviously. I will give them a worksheet to work through. I will give them handouts, which is kind of more written information on it, because some students consume it better when it's written. I also record the tutorials, so I record all the tutorials and all mathematical equations by hand, because there's lots of maths and economics, so I record them and pop them up. And I also include a podcast of every tutorial. Now, these are AI generated using Notebook, okay? So what I do is I take the PDF of my slides and I take the Word documents and I input it. And so, for example, my first years this year, I happen to have an awful lot of Ukrainian students. So I created 15-minute podcasts on the topic, just short podcasts, and said, this is for first year economics students in ATU Galway. Some of them are Ukrainian. Can you include some information on the Ukrainian economy, etc., etc. So actually, the feedback from the students post semester, about 20 to 30% of them actually listen to the podcast. So they quite like them as a supplement or as just a different way of consuming the information. So this is a lot of work. This has taken a couple of years to kind of build it up to this. But I am conscious that it's nice to have kind of various different mediums for the students to absorb information. In terms of lectures, trying to break down lectures to make them more palatable for students. I try to break the lecture segments into 2 15-minute segments, and we have a little break or have a content or a little video in between these segments. And then we generally try and have group discussions, which is very interesting now for economics. In terms of AI, I ask students to use their own devices and ask them to check ChatGPT or Copilot, ask it questions based on what we've just talked about. And then we kind of have a discussion on what it says compared to what we've discussed in class. And I use these kind of countdown timers. So it might look something like this. So how are money markets different to capital markets? So I'll ask them to take 5 minutes to write down the answer. And then I want them to use ChatGPT or a Copilot to help them answer these questions. And then we'll have a little discussion on how the answers differ, for example, just to give them a sense of how they can use it correctly, I suppose. This is another one on how treasury bills are priced. Ask them to open Copilot and have a discussion on them afterwards. In terms of tutorial enhancements, I really redesigned my tutorials so that they're more interactive, reflective, and require deep kind of critical thinking. So I try to give out academic papers, we read them, we have a discussion on them. I give worksheets and solutions for each topic and make sure that they're all posted online. And as I said, we read discussions. In terms of announcements, so what's really worked well this year, and I've only introduced it this year, is at the start of every week, I send out an announcement to the students outlining what the topic we're going to be doing, what the tutorial material is, and I link exactly to I link it to the Moodle material, so they just have to click the link. They know exactly what to do this week, whether they're coming in or not coming in, okay? That's the live links. I've also set up a journal club this year across, which is ATU-wide. It's multidisciplinary. I'll give you the link to anybody that wants it afterwards. More than welcome, interdisciplinary. So it's just, we choose a different article every second week. Someone presents it, we discuss it, we critique it, for example, and we're running this through MS Teams. So it's something that I've really introduced a lot of this year, is kind of using more Teams for interactive stuff. That's kind of essentially what the Teams looks like for the journal club. And this is one of the papers that was put in. I also use Notebook LM to create a podcast for it. So if people want to listen to the journal article via podcast, they can do that. So I have a lot done. There's a lot more to do in terms of kind of changing everything. It's a huge amount of work, but slowly but surely getting there. So thank you for listening. And if you have any questions,
So much, Sinead. That was fantastic. Sinead, I have one question for you. You mentioned there the 30 marks allocated on teams for the individual.
Yes.
How do you actually implement that in practice, and what are you looking for from the students that will align with that 30 marks?
Yeah, I suppose to make sure that from the outset that each student is posting into that Teams channel. So I ask them to organise their team meetings, so I know then whether they're meeting, who has a team, to make sure that if somebody is finding information or importing it or a journal article or link, that it would all be posted into that team. So it's actually very visible who is adding something into that. So and then I give them based on what they're adding.
It's an innovative approach, and it's such an engaging module as well. I actually want to do it myself. Has anybody any other questions? Yes, John.
You ready?
Sean.
Thanks very much. Thank you, Sinead. That was a very, very interesting presentation, and commend you on your UDL credentials and applying them. I was wondering, have you given any consideration to creating your own chat GPT just for the module that would have a UDL principled construction?
Gosh, I haven't actually. I mean,
Would it be something that you would be interested in doing?
yes, it would. Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I really want to push forward the UDL principles and, this inclusive learning for everybody. And, we are moving forward, and I know people want bums and seats, but we are moving forward in a way that people learn in different ways. I'm a visual learner. When I was doing economics, I needed graphs. I couldn't read a block of text and get it. I learned from graphs. So, I've had people with visual impairments in my classes. They can't see the graphs. So therefore, they need to learn in a very different way. Same with maths, etc. So we do need to be cognizant going forward, and, older people, all these various different people. So I would love to do that. Yeah.
I won't take the rugby pass as a Munster woman. Well done, Sinead. That was just fascinating, and just the investment that you're making, and particularly with students from all different dimensions in terms of their learning style. I love the concept of the left brain, right brain that you're subtly building into the module as well. And also that peer-to-peer learning, the Padlet.
Yes.
And even that inclusion of students from different geographies, cultures, and the Padlet, the angles, and even the journal articles that they pick themselves. And we had a very good discussion last week about students as in partners in their learning, and that option of allowing them self-select what's of interest to them, and podcasts and all the rest of it. So it's all in there. So just to congratulate you on it.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Sinead. That's fantastic. Thanks a million. Can we just take one more?
Sorry, I was just going to ask one other question there, and I absolutely loved the presentation. Sinead, how do you, with so much material being generated on the course in all these different multiple means, how do you help the students to prioritize which activities they take part in? Is there something that you do around that? Obviously, it's quite open, I think, but is there a way that you can help to guide them as to what activities they complete?
It's generally kind of group discussions. So I suppose most of these elements are for smaller groups. I have larger classes with 120 and 150 students. So it's not as easy to have those smaller elements. It's more so for the fourth years. But as we go forward into the smaller groups, we just have group discussions. And I suppose, particularly with fourth years, I know them because I've had them from first, second year. So I kind of get to know what suits their needs better. And we'll have a discussion in class. I'll go around to each of them, and we'll have a bit of a chat, and we'll figure out what suits their needs. Yeah.
Thank you.
Sorry, Karina, did you have one more? Lovely.
A question from Margaret Doherty. Fantastic presentation, Sinead. Do you find you have to moderate the notebook podcasts, is there ever any inaccurate information in there?
Generally, there isn't in the podcasts that are generated. Again, I have to listen to them before I can pop them up, so I do have to listen to them. But generally, it's not, because they're only taking the information that I'm feeding into it. It might take some statistics or something like that, or some general information, for example, from Ukraine, and add it in. But generally, it doesn't add in. I ask it to use primarily what I feed it and the documents that I feed it in. So it doesn't really take much from any other areas. But yes, I do have to listen to all the podcasts before I pop them up. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Sinead. And Sinead will be around at lunchtime as well if anybody wants to catch up with her a little bit on that. So next up we have Anne O'Mahony. Where's Anne? So Anne is a funded PhD student in the School of Education and Lifelong Learning at South East Technological University. Anne has more than 20 years of teaching and learning experience in information technology and adult learning and development in adult basic education, community education as a tutor with Cork ETB, and most recently on the Technological Enhanced Learning module on Marino Institute of Education's Professional Diploma in Education. So Anne's presentation is on the initial findings of her research, which is entitled Further Education Teacher Educators' Narratives on Their Digital Pedagogy. That's a mouthful, Anne. Right, lovely. Over to you, Anne. Thank you.
It is a bit of a mouthful. It's the actual title. What I'm looking at today here is part of that, because I am at relatively an early stage in the research. So I'm giving you just the drivers of the digital pedagogy for teacher educators for the further education sector. And as you'd have heard in the introduction, my background is further education, but specifically it's the adult basic education and the literacy element of that. But I was coming into literacy as an IT tutor because there was no stigma coming to a computer class, but there would have been stigma coming to a literacy, numeracy class. And in my time as a tutor within the FE, I came in just when it had gone from voluntary into more group settings. And some of the other tutors came from the voluntary, and that's where started my interest in, are they using computers? Why are they using computers? Why aren't they using computers? And that has followed along through the process. Now, the sector has changed immensely since I started working in it. And the change is not only in the past, but it is going into the future. And if you look at any of the policy documents, it's going. So the goal is, I think, one that speaks to the FEC sector, because FE is anything that isn't primary, secondary, or university, and it has been defined by what it's not. And again, the goal is, every other system is planning for digital transformation, so FET has to too. But this is where the biggest change is coming in, because the FET sector will have to focus on the creation and delivery of a flexible and appropriate and blended learning opportunities for learners, which could be accessed at a variety of levels within an integrated FET College of the Future. Now, this plan for the FET College of the Future is, from my perspective, really working towards the higher levels of FE, 5 and 6 predominantly, 4 kind of at a, we'll let you in, and the 1, 2 and 3s are kind of being, oh, you have to be there, so we'll. But the College of the Future is looking at using technology both in class and as blended for synchronous and asynchronous learning. Now, You'll have nearly all come across some version of this quote where the rate of change isn't happening at the rate that the policy and sometimes administration wanted to. Yeah, I showed this to a friend of mine and she came up with some really rude comments on my picture, but I think it's worth looking at. And I will come back to it. No, COVID was a massive change because it forced people to break all the rules. But it broke them in a way that only took it to emergency remote teaching for a lot of people. And what I'm interested in my research is looking at the teacher educators who are teaching the future FE teachers. And I'm going, right, we're looking at you, not the students. Like a lot of the research that we were listening to this morning is focused on students. How are they learning? But there's very little coming back on who's teaching. And if there is, it's there in a quantitative survey kind of way. What are you using? But even less on why are you using it? That's what I was interested in. I like asking why questions. So this is the overall question that's driving the research. So what are their experiences? But not only what are the experiences, I want the associated narratives. What stories do they tell about their experiences? And I am limiting it then to the Irish Further Education teacher educators because they're my tribe. And it's around their digital pedagogy and then taking digital pedagogy. Well, what is digital pedagogy? As far as I'm concerned, digital pedagogy is teaching with, through, and about computers. So it's a very wide block or area and can incorporate multiple things. So in the research, I'm doing constructivist grounded theory, semi-structured interviews of teacher educators for further education that have more than 5 years experience. Because I wanted to get in that COVID shift. I wanted to be able to talk to people who had been there before, who had gone through the seismic shift and what their practice looked like now. Now, in this, as I say, it's an early stage. I've done my initial coding. I'm kind of at the focus coding, but I'm still backwards and forwards as anybody who's used constructivist grounded theory goes. It's not as linear as it sounds in the book. But it's very interesting. Okay. I went in with a kind of a set of expectations. I was wrong. I thought policy didn't matter at all, but it does. But in a way that I knew, but I didn't. Policy is changing, and not because it's promoting it, but because institutional policy is changing the format of the programs. Now, the PDFE programs, which is, I'm calling them all general, they're all postgraduate programs in teaching and learning for further education. So they are, even if they're full-time, they're very limited contact hours. They're increasingly going blended. Now, when I'm saying blended, then there is the blended that is synchronous and the blended that is asynchronous. Sometimes there is choice in that for the lecturers, sometimes there isn't. So there's a lot of changes going on there, but that policy and those policies, and even some of the teacher educators were looking at how the policy was coming and how it was going to affect their students. So the switch to the colleges of the future was impacting them. Right, we have to get them ready for this, where they teach blended learning. It's not enough to do it the way we're doing it. The personal priorities and values. I'm kind of looking at merging this with personal orientations, and this is where I'm saying to Zerli, because I keep changing the categories that I'm putting things into. Their personal priorities and values includes their teaching philosophy and their background. which is the orientations as well. So within that group of people, within those teacher educators, you have people who are coming from a very Freirean background where everything is very social constructivist, where it's all about dialogue and it's about building. And at the very extreme end, it's about coming in and building for change. Then you have the humanist, you have the social constructivist, but we're following the program. And then you have just one or two strict behaviorists, just like, these are the learning outcomes, we're going to get you to the learning outcomes, that's it, the way it goes. So that's changing what they're doing. So I was kind of smiling to myself. A lot of the MCQs that you would have heard talked about earlier on today, they would probably fall into the very behaviorist categories. Okay? Whereas when Sinead was talking, and Sinead was actually, I can't even see where Sinead has gone now, she's there. When Sinead was talking, was echoed in a lot of what I was coming across, was that it was the learners, it was what they needed, it was how they needed it. But then there were some little hiccups because there were experiences that had been tried and seemed to have failed. I'm not doing that again. And that's the interesting part, because like the presentation this morning that quoted Ken Robinson, is the willingness to fail. But what do you do with that failure? Do you just go, that's hot, I'm not touching that again? Or do you try a different way around it? Some of those are coming up in the meaning. There's also the orientations around their own background and their orientation towards tech. Some of them are very techy. Oh Lord, some of them are really, really techy. They are absolutely passionate about the technology and will come in, and one teacher educator described it, she came in, I showed them all the bells and whistles. I showed them every app I could find of. And then in the evaluation, she realized, whoops, I totally overwhelmed them. They had a surface level of almost everything and deep knowledge of little or nothing. So she changed her practice. There was one teacher educator who came in with a massive Moodle background. Moodle was how he got interested in teaching. And he had started off like everything had to be asynchronous online. And now inside in his classroom, he's as likely, if not more likely, to pull out flip chart sheets and markers and ask him to do group work face. Because his values and priorities have changed, and he has seen that that's sometimes what the learners need. Sometimes the learners don't need the tech, they actually need the social relations. And I told you I was going to come back to my bios. And this is where I found that a lot of the experiences and the meanings that the teacher educators were making was like this. Policy was the turtle, they were the snail, and they were pointing in different directions. Not always, but a lot of the time. And if you're going, if that's the way change is going, where is it going? Thank you.
You're fantastic. Thanks so much. Does anybody have any questions for Anne, either here in the room or online?
Oh, we have them over here. Thank you, Anne. That was really interesting. I just more comments than anything. I found, ironically, we're all here today with our PowerPoint slides presenting, and many of us probably don't use them with PowerPoint fatigue as much as we used to. So I just thought it was very interesting how you are talking around the qualitative aspect of teaching and learning, because I think often what people have to say is much more valuable in under the surface of learning how we can change our practice. And I think
anyone who's here is probably converted, but a lot of people can do things the way they've always done it because that's the way it's always been done. And back in the early noughties, we in our School of Science were very lucky that we had a lot of instruction around teaching and learning. And I always remember thinking anybody can go into a lab. So this guy came and spoke to us, I can't remember his name. And it was like anybody can go into a lab with the 10 steps of, say, doing the experiment. But if we asked them to come up with an experiment to do that, and they had to come up with the steps, there would be real learning. And I remember that day that my whole attitude to teaching and learning changed because it was so true. It was a matter of just reading steps and pouring things out. So just everything you said there, I just wanted to say, and I could kind of really, I suppose, associate with, I suppose. So yeah, very interesting.
There is that very interesting kind of a dichotomy between the instructional designers and the teachers. And the instructional designers was saying, well, anyone could go in and teach. That's easy. To really design instructional design online is very difficult. And the teachers are kind of going, anyone can sit down and with enough time and an ideal group create a course online. And it's like this group, and even wider into teaching and learning on a broader sense, you can't be one or the other anymore. And it's like there's a marrying going on between the two that's being, to some extent, forced, to some extent being led, and to some extent being resisted, which is really, really interesting. Sorry, the voice is starting to.
No, not at all. Thank you so much again, Anne. Thanks very much. So that concludes the morning session. So, Karina, am I right that we're back in here again at 2 p.m?
So everybody online, we will be back at 2 o'clock. 2 o'clock sharp for our next keynote of the day. So we're looking forward to that. So thank you for all the speakers this morning. So lunch is just out in the foyer. So thank you.